I always call it a slide into burnout, because for me, it felt as if I was sliding down into something, into an abyss of somewhere I didn't want to go. So I was very, very aware that I was working late until the night and having to keep up a consistency of really intense work. I was somewhat aware that I'd be able to fall asleep, but then I wouldn't be able to stay asleep. Everything else was a lower priority, including the people I was around. I realized that I literally didn't recognize myself anymore. I didn't really know what I liked anymore. I was quite not in touch with my own values. All I remember, all I was aware of at the time was that I was just having to work and work and work to succeed. I knew instinctively that I needed to reconnect with who I was, which included things like, what's important to me? What do I want out of the rest of my life? What impact do I want to make?
But according to our investigators' report, we find that Mr. Green doesn't have a steady income. Let's go.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Shameless Careers, a podcast for high-achieving professionals rethinking success through career experiments, bold pivots, and entrepreneurial ventures. Today's episode explores two deeply connected themes: burnout in high-pressure industries and the critical role of organizational culture in career fulfillment. I'll be discussing these topics with Daphne Chung. After completing an MBA at London Business School, Daphne pursued a career in consulting. However, after experiencing burnout, she decided to reassess her life's priorities and ask herself, is becoming and staying a partner really how I want to spend my life? Or is there a more meaningful path that I could follow? These questions led Daphne to take her executive coaching practice, Brave and Resolute, full-time, a practice she now finds deeply fulfilling and is actively building into a consultancy over time. In this interview, we'll have an honest conversation about what it's like to step away from a stable, prestigious career path, how to recognize the early signs of burnout, and how to build emotional resilience if you find yourself in a toxic work environment. So, Daphne, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Varia, so thank you.
Let's go back to your time at London Business School when you wanted to join consulting. Can you tell me what excited you about consulting? Why did you want to join specifically this career path?
Throughout my career, I always follow my curiosity. I always follow my nose in a way into my curiosity. And at the time when I was thinking about going to business school, I was working as a writer within the advertising industry serving the medical world. And I was always at the almost sort of the receiving end of a lot of strategic and marketing decisions that had been made. And I always wondered, how are those decisions made? And what does it take to be the person who makes those decisions? So I looked into it and I understood that I needed to know a lot more about business. And the beginning of my career was very much in communications. So I didn't really understand very much about business. And I wanted to be more at the forefront of business decision making. And I knew somebody who was getting into the consulting industry. So he was quite inspiring for me. And I wondered whether or not that was something actually also that would fit me. I understood that going from a creative role in a creative world into the business world was going to be quite a leap, and that doing an MBA within a good business school could give you a bit of a leg up to do that. So I applied and I got in and I did the MBA and I went into consulting, and I really found that this was a place where I could satisfy my curiosity and learn so much about business and learn so much about management and learn so much about marketing, because the consultancy I went into was marketing. And I knew that this was a place that I wanted to spend some time and really learn the craft in.
And how was this experience? Was it what you expected? Were you happy doing it?
On balance, it was a mixture. So I loved that I was working with really, really smart people. And I also loved that I was working on many different things, not necessarily at the same time, really depended on the consultancy that I was in. And I've been in a number of consultancies, but I loved the variety and the diversity of business problems that we were tasked to solve. I learned so much. I learned so much from the people around me. I learned so much on my own as well. And I learned so much about myself in terms of becoming a professional in the working world. There was also the other side, which was the work-life balance. I didn't really know what that meant until I went into a consultancy where I went into an industry where work-life balance was something you had to think about. I embraced that. I was in the roles where everyone was working really hard, and I learned a lot. I'm a huge learner. lifelong learner. So learning was really, really satisfying for me. So I really enjoyed it, absolutely, in the beginning. And then, of course, I had the burnout experience. So that gave me a slightly different take on life.
That's very interesting. And before we go there, it's safe to say that the actual content of the work and type of work is something that you quite enjoyed, right? So it wasn't like you were disappointed with what your role was and what type of learning you got. You actually did like it. So it was something else that in the end started to make you rethink your career path, right?
Yes, that's true. Absolutely. I went into consulting with the idea that I was going to work my way up. I didn't sort of attach to that idea because some people go into consulting wanting to learn and then take it away and go back into an industry. I always had the choice of going into the pharmaceutical industry. That was my main client if I wanted to, but something about consulting always made me stay. So I stayed. And then I burnt out quite badly in a particular consultancy. And even though what had been happening had been really satisfying, it's almost as if I came to a different choice point in my life, which was around what do you really want to do for the rest of your time? The work-life balance part was huge because that's one of the things that can be a contributor to burnout. So I needed to think about what would be sustainable, and if this were an opportunity for me to just take stock and think about, how do I want to spend the next phase of my life, however long my life is, then what is it that I really want to do? I mentioned the deathbed question. It sounds a bit morbid, but I found that this question helped me to really get clear and align on what I wanted to do. I should say as a side point that I had been coaching for quite a while, actually. So I trained as a coach and qualified as a coach 8 years ago, and I was coaching alongside this consulting role. So I kind of had 1.5 jobs. And I always knew that I really enjoyed coaching. I made a joke early on in my coaching career to somebody. I said it was so rewarding. It's something I could just see myself doing, helping people who needed it. Of course, I need to make a living doing it. But it was something that was so satisfying because you could see the rewards directly and you could see them quickly. And I found that really satisfying. So I always knew that coaching was something that I would probably move into at some point in my life. And probably that would be at some point later on. I always joked that it would be my retirement plan. I had this burnout experience and I asked myself a deathbed question, which was something along the lines of, when you're sitting in your final bed, your deathbed, and you're looking back on your life, then what would I be really happy to say I had done, I had achieved, something that I would be really happy to say that this is what I spent my life or some of my life doing? What would it be? And the answer was almost instant, like a voice in my head. Was it going to be working within an industry that was going to take quite a lot out of me? That wasn't the thing that I was beginning to understand I was most passionate about? Or was it going to be helping people directly in an area that I had skills in, I had done really well in so far? And the answer was actually very obvious when I asked myself the deathbed question.
And do you feel that if you didn't experience the burnout, do you feel like you would have continued down that path, or do you think one way or another this question would have come up for you?
It's such an excellent question. I think one way or another that question would have come to me. Because I suppose in some way, along the way in my consulting career, I had begun quietly asking myself that question anyway. And I think the answer back then was later. Something just happened to bring that answer forward. And it also helped me to kind of come to believe that things happen when I'm ready. And maybe things coalesced in a way that meant that I was ready to embark on a solopreneurship journey and to say goodbye to the security and so on and so forth of being an employee. Maybe I'll be an employer at some point in the future. And to go on to work out how to do things on my own. I think that question would have come up at some point even if I hadn't burnt out.
And looking back, what do you think was missing in the consulting path that would make this question come up?
I think there's something around, as a coach, being able to see how you're directly helping people, and being able to observe visibly in real time how a person is developing, And I suppose there's an element of knowing that some of that change has got something to do with having a conversation with you. And I don't mean this at all in any egotistic way, because I don't think my ego doesn't come into coaching. It absolutely shouldn't. But there was something about supporting people directly that really spoke to me. And interestingly, I guess it's something that's gone through my life in a way as a thread. And sometimes these threads become conscious, they emerge, and they become very obvious why one has done something. I come from a line of medics. My dad's a doctor. My grandfather was a psychiatrist. My great-grandfather was a Chinese doctor. So I suppose there was an expectation in myself that I was going to do something that would help people or serve people in some way. And I didn't go into the things that my father and so on went into. I sort of did things on my own. I did my own way. But I'd always been interested in psychology. I had already gone to get a master's in organizational psychology about 6 years ago. So I guess there's a huge clue. I had already gone to do some training in attachment theory. I'd already gone also to do some training in human personality. So there were clues popping up everywhere. And I guess my subconscious was gearing me up to make a change that fell into that side of life. Yeah.
It's so interesting. You mentioned the direct help to people, and I'm thinking there are clearly some consulting projects which are in one way or another benefiting people, but the fact that it's so kind of intermediated, I think always makes it so difficult to see the impact directly on people's life. And I'm talking about consulting, but I think it applies to many industries. In essence, you may be contributing and doing a good thing, but I think because everything is so big and specialized, and it's like really hard to see the process of helping someone end to end.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And for some people, that's where they want to be. The work that I was doing was indirectly making a difference for patients in helping them to access or to understand the kind of medication they would need, et cetera, et cetera. But I suppose the way my brain works is if I found a way to make a more direct and somewhat immediate impact on people, then somehow that's what I wanted to do. That pulled me a little bit more, maybe a lot more actually. And so I didn't even know that this would be the case, but once I started coaching and seeing that, then it became a no-brainer that this is what aligns with me, being able to make a really direct impact in a way that felt more tangible for me, I suppose, than consulting did. There were so many other things about consulting that I absolutely loved. But the interesting thing is, I suppose I learned something about my values when I had the burnout experience, because I had to think about what my bad values were afterwards. And I learned a lot of things about myself, which if I hadn't had that burnout experience, I probably wouldn't have come across as soon as I did.
And can you tell me more about that? How did the experience of burnout bring you to think harder and more specifically about the values that you have?
The burnout experience I had, first of all, I didn't even know I was burning out, which was super scary. I can now, because I'd done all my research on it and learned about it and tried to sort of figure out how do I help people who may be in a similar or maybe reaching a similar situation. I came across a model of how people burn out. I always call it a slide into burnout, because for me it felt as if I was sliding down into something, into an abyss of somewhere I didn't want to go. And in this model, there are 12 stages. And towards the end of the stage, you get to a point where if the burnout's quite severe, you get to a point where you don't recognize yourself, dissociation, disconnection from yourself. And there's a whole process to getting there. The process is cognitive, emotional, and physical. And I had all of it. But when I burnt out, and I didn't even realize there's something happened. I was burning out. Something happened in my private life that I talked to a friend about. And it's almost as if she gave me permission to say, you know what, I think I need to just pause and take care of myself now. If I hadn't had a conversation like that with a support person, I may not have noticed it. And that's just the way that I was at that time. So I went on medical leave for a bit, and I decided to go into a totally different environment. I went to stay with my brother in a different country. And it's lucky that I was able to. Of course, not everybody can do that. But I decided to find the environment where I could recover. And because luckily I realized that I literally didn't recognize myself anymore. Like I didn't really know what I liked anymore. I was quite not in touch with my own values. All I remember, all I was aware of at the time was that I was just having to work and work and work to succeed. And again, that falls into the way my psychology is. I'm an insecure overachiever, or maybe I'd like to say I was an insecure overachiever, which is sort of, I guess, maybe a typical profile who comes into these high intensity, fast moving, demanding environments. I wanted so much to achieve because I wanted external validation. I needed it. I needed to know I was doing well, and I needed somebody else to tell me I was doing well. That's why I was striving and pushing myself so hard to work. I was in a position where lots of operational things were going wrong. When I went to stay with my brother, I knew instinctively that I needed to reconnect with who I was, which included things like, what's important to me? What do I want out of the rest of my life? What impact do I want to make? What are my values around working? My values back then were around working really, really hard. Great, I'm a hard worker, conscientious and diligent. But actually, what was going to give me more meaning in the work I was doing? And from there, that's where it went on to endpoint coaching. I think I need to do that full time.
The meaning question is so difficult for so many people, especially if, to your point, a lot of the mindset of high achievers and high pressure industries is around this validation, saying, okay, I can do it. It's almost always about something external, whether it's status, promotions, more money, looking like you're competent. And that makes the question of meaning even more difficult, because if you've lived your life like this for a while, how do you even know what else can be meaningful? So how was it for you? What helped you to discover what something meaningful for you actually is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things I did was to go back and think about what I was like as a kid, to go back and think about what do I remember myself doing? Like really fundamental things like, how much was I around other people? How much was I on my own? When I was on my own, what did I do? What did I really enjoy doing? What did I spend lots of time doing? And I did a lot of writing and I did a lot of painting. I was very creative when I was a kid. I suppose hence I went into writing as one of my early career. I was also very thoughtful as a kid. I'm introverted. I spent a lot of time deep in my own thoughts. What else did I like to do? I always wanted to serve people in some way. So I nurtured aspirations of medicine as well. So I looked back on who I was as a kid. I even asked my mum, I think, who was I? What do you remember about me when I was a kid? My hypothesis in a way was me as a kid is authentically me. Of course, children are authentic until something about the world shapes them in a different way. And then they absorb expectations, all of that stuff. And then they get into the working world. And then you're having to, I hate to use this word, conform, but you're having to be in a certain way. So I wanted to know originally, the original me, what was that like? And then I had a clue because I had coached. How did I get into coaching? Why did I get into coaching? What have been my experiences in coaching? What data do I pick up from there? And I also wanted to look at why is it that I was vulnerable to burning out? What was it about external validation that I needed so much? So I had a whole load of reflection, self-reflection. I wrote journals. I wrote so much. Everything I wrote down. I wrote it, I typed it, all of it, I talked it. It was stuff that I was trying to straighten out in my mind. It became a journey of self-discovery, basically, starting with who was I way back then and how did that change as I went through and what would I like to reset in a way to get back on a more authentic path. And it's also something that I do with my clients sometimes when they feel that they're disconnected from themselves. Go back to the beginning and then figure out what your life track has been and how things have changed for you. What would you like to change back? And I suppose you could look at it the other way and you could say, okay, did you move so far away from who you wanted to be in your career? I was always following my nose of curiosity. So no, I everything I do is because I want to learn something more. But now I think I'm more aware of how to better balance authenticity with trying stuff that's new. And I have a great need to succeed. So I always need to also sort of ask myself, if you're gonna go down that way, where is it going to take you? And is it in line with what you want to ultimately achieve in life?
And is there anything a high achiever who is pursuing external validation, is there anything that they can do to be more resilient and to exhibit less of these behaviors? And the reason why I'm asking this is you and I have talked about the fact that this seeking external validation is something that makes people really prone to burnout, because no matter what happens around them, no matter what the external environment is asking them to do, they will always drop everything to deliver it at any cost, just because they want to still do a good job. And that contributes to burnout. So is there any kind of thought pattern and any tips that you could give to someone who is experiencing this in order to seek less of this external validation and I guess keep more boundaries around their time, their health, in order not to burn out when the requirements are really, really harsh?
One of the things is, if you have the opportunity to work with someone, work with someone. The other thing is self-reflection on why it's so important to have this external validation. Where is that tracking back to? And even if one can't isolate that, I think you've said a word that is really, really important, which is boundaries. If you're in the here and now, maybe you don't have the opportunity to do a lot of soul searching to understand, why am I in the here and now? What can I do about the here and now? So what I found and what I've experienced is seeking external validation often comes alongside something like imposter syndrome or perfectionism. And sometimes this can involve a voice that's in the head, an inner critic that is telling the person that they need to be doing better, that there's something that is not helpful, very unhelpful thoughts, which are driving them forward to try and prove something to themselves or to the external world. So one of these things, in order to be able to maintain a level of perspective and clarity, is to transform that voice, the inner critic. And one of the things that I found was useful for me, and I talk about with some clients, is taking that voice and externalizing it into something that you can hold away from you can emotionally detach from. I had a client who had this very, very, very strong inner critic. It was the voice of her father, she explained to me. And so what I helped her to do was to take that voice and put it into something else or someone else, even if it's an imaginary figure, and to give it a name and a character, someone who you can distance yourself from. You can choose whether or not to engage with. She decided to call her voice Trevor. So it was Trevor. We externalized the voice into Trevor. Sorry about the Trevors out there. We mean nothing untoward to you. But she just called this guy Trevor. And she imagined that Trevor was this person who was sort of bugging her. And every time the inner critic came back up in what she was doing, she would say, "Oh, it's Trevor on the phone again. I really don't want to talk to Trevor." So she'd hold the phone away from her. That helped her to reframe this voice as something that wasn't necessarily internal to her. And she was able to keep it at bay, hold a boundary around herself so that Trevor wouldn't influence the way that she behaved. So that's one thing, holding emotional detachment from the critic. So there are some other practical things, such as perspectives. So seeking feedback from people who would be able to give a clear and balanced point of view, seeking feedback from people who may be able to translate constructive feedback into action that can be made. So balancing what's going on in one's mind and the driver to work and seek this external validation with actually what's going on. This is why support network is really, really important within a burnout situation, or actually within any situation. The people around you can help you maintain a sense of clarity and can also literally help you, support you when you're needing help. And I find that, speaking from my own past experience and also people that I've worked with, there's a level of not being very kind to yourself that happens, that fuels some of that striving and proving behavior. So being able to just be a little bit more compassionate and kind to oneself is useful. For example, being able to take on an attitude that this is called local rationality principle. It's even got a fancy name. Being able to take on the attitude that one's behaviors and actions were made on the basis of what you knew and what you could do at the time. It's really easy to go back in time and go, in hindsight, I wish I had da 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 da. But actually, most of the time, people make decisions and act in a way that reflects the information, the capabilities they have at the time. So looking back and being hard on yourself after that isn't very helpful. So I suppose the question then is, what can you learn? What can you know of the time there? And ways in which you can influence your environment will help. I'm going to quote Stephen Covey's circles of influence here, and the 3 circles. It's really simple and it's very useful to think about in these situations. Circle 1, what can I do? In what way can I act to actually change what's going on? Where do I have control? Circle 2, influence is the circle that's sort of slightly outside the core circle. What can I shape in order to make a situation go in a way that is more conducive for me? And then circle 3 is, what do I have no control over that I have to accept? I think if I had even thought about what was going on for me when I burnt out in those 3 ways, then I would have been able to form some kind of strategy to help me to not burn out as quickly as I did.
So we have spoken about what you personally can do to be a bit more resilient, to fight this need for external validation that can in turn lead to your burnout. But what if really you are in an environment where a lot of people burn out? Like, for example, your team is understaffed, or maybe the culture is not great, because a lot of people burn out also due to some external factors that are surrounding them. Is there any way to influence this environment, or should you just kind of work on to your point, what you can control and on your emotional resilience? Or is there any like conversation or anything externally that you can do to change, I guess, your circumstances?
It doesn't make any sense to not act on a piece of insight that a person has if acting is going to be helpful. So just thinking in really general terms, if you're seeing that, if you're seeing an under-resourcing problem, or if you're seeing some practical problems that are not helping, then being able to bring this to the awareness of somebody who can make a change related to that. How you do that, what you say is going to be very dependent on where you are and who you are, obviously, but acting on what you're seeing is definitely helpful. Will also depend actually on how psychologically safe your environment is, but maybe we'll talk about that later. If you're the leader, or if you're somebody who has a level of influence, then leaning into that influence, of course, is a useful thing too. That might look like amping up your empathy, amping up listening to people, amping up being curious about what people's experiences are, asking some really open questions, observing the team, observing how people are interacting, observing whether people are interacting, and really trying to take a temperature check of what's going on in the team. I say that because I guess in my experience in the burnout situation I was in, I felt very under-supported in the situation that was going on. I remember feeling like I'd really, really appreciate it if someone can notice how difficult this is. Because all I'm doing is just head down, trying to work, and just try and get this to be successful. So I would appeal to leaders to pay attention to what's going on within their teams. And everybody thinks, yeah, of course I do that. Then I would just challenge them to say, well, what more? What is one more thing you can do to do that even a bit more? What is one more thing you can do to answer the question of what does your team need? And then how can you begin helping to resolve that for them?
And if you're on the receiving end of this, is there any way, so you've mentioned bringing it to someone's awareness, like what's a good way to say to someone, look, I'm burning out and this is not good? Like what message would you deliver to, I don't know, the leader of this team that can help them change course?
I would encourage finding a way to speak up and essentially to self-advocate. You'd need to think very carefully about what your relationship with and what the quality of the relationship is and how to communicate with the person who is your manager. But I would definitely say find a way of self-advocating. Self-advocating might be not necessarily going to the manager yet, might be leveraging some other support networks, might be leveraging some other people within the environment. It might even be thinking about what can I do differently to help things, other ways in which I'm not being efficient. One of the things definitely to think about is, does everything have to be 100%? 80-20 principle, which us consultants ex-consultant, so fond of. What will really move the needle here? Is everything going to move the needle? Probably not. Something is going to have a bigger impact. So being able to modulate, and I think that takes a lot of bravery, because perfectionists want to do everything perfectly. I hold my hand up and say, yeah, I'm like that. But actually being able to figure out what's really going to move the needle, it's quite a relief, because it means you don't have to do everything to 100%. You can do a good enough.
Which then comes back to what we just spoke about. If you haven't addressed your constant need of external validation, that would be really difficult to do to do something good enough, right? So it's almost like you need to do the self-hygiene first and realize that external validation is not something that you need to get at all costs. And then you, I think, will have this bravery and courage to become a bit more pragmatic and be more happy with good enough.
And it will probably track down to how you feel and think about yourself. So I'm going to talk about myself as an example again. Back then, I was needing external validation because I just needed to know that I was doing a good job. I was a good enough consultant, a good enough, and my progression was going to go this way, and all of those things. But I think one of the things that the burnout experience taught me was I am responsible for how I think about myself. No-brainer. And actually, what is my self-concept, and where is that coming from? And what is the evidence for what I can think, how I can perceive myself? And so part of the retrospective of looking back on my life and figuring out what was it that I loved when I was a kid and all of that stuff is also, okay, what have I done over my life that means that I am this concept of a person? And so I really leaned into that, and that helped me to not need to be validated from the outside. To put it in a really, really simplistic way, it helped me to bring some of that more internally. And also, I guess I realized not striving for perfect all the time meant that I would have some space in my head to do something else that would be really interesting. And that would be really a really interesting learning opportunity if I weren't using up all of my capacity to make something 100% amazing, If it didn't need to be, then I take some of that capacity and expand what I was able to learn and do.
Right. So coming back to why it's important to have a strong self-concept, it's because it will save you from going down the rabbit hole that your only objective in life is to be a good consultant, right? You almost like reconnect with who you are, you value yourself for who you are, you see yourself as something bigger rather than a person who needs to be an excellent consultant. And that gives you courage to say, okay, maybe there are other things that are important, and maybe I shouldn't just prove that I'm an excellent consultant at all costs, right? There are some bigger things and more exciting things in life.
The way that I see it, is around balance now. I think I needed to be reminded that work is a part of our lives. My burnout experience essentially was asking me, what about all the other parts of you that you've neglected? The other parts of you that you're not in touch with anymore? What a shame to lose those things. And so rebalancing who I was, my self-concept, if I can use that term again, was really important.
To close out on the burnout topic, if someone feels that they may be experiencing a burnout, but they don't quite know that it is burnout, could you tell me what early signs someone can monitor and watch out for? And also, what helped you most to get out of the state of burnout?
So this is sort of leaning into a little bit into my experience of burnout, not so much in the, there is a formal definition of burnout by Maslach. But from my experience, in addition to what Maslach is saying, I knew there was a physical aspect. So I was very, very aware that I was working late until the night and having to keep up a consistency of really intense work. Okay, obvious. I was somewhat aware that I'd be able to fall asleep, but then I wouldn't be able to stay asleep. And so I would be waking up in the early hours, strategizing, problem solving, trying to just almost fixated and obsessed with trying to figure out how to make things, how to do everything and how to make things work. And so I wasn't realizing I was probably getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep every night. I was somewhat aware that I had a really strange twitch in my leg. Like my leg wouldn't stop spasming. Never done that before and hasn't done that since. but it's almost as if there was a physical manifestation of the anxiety that I was experiencing, and it was in a leg because I wasn't allowing myself to experience it up here. So my leg was going, you're anxious, and you're going to know that because you're spasming. And then other things like eating and that kind of thing, nourishment, that everything else became a lower priority to the work that I was doing, basically. So the physical manifestation is the obvious way that you can detect it. If you're a self-aware person and you're self-reflective enough, then you may notice some of the things that I was noticing, which was that everything else was a lower priority, including the people I was around. Lower priority. I just had to fixate it, had to get this right. And something I started to do in order to be able to make it okay was to rationalize that it was okay, and any demands from the outside were not okay. People demanding me for my time. People saying to me, hold on a sec, are you working a bit too hard? I would just sort of go, what do they know? It was almost easy to reorient my values so that my singular value that I was leaning into was striving, was work, success, achievement. And then I was just about sustaining that when something happened in my private life, and it was like a bowling ball had gone into, down the alley and was smashing everything to bits. And I literally thought, I don't know if I can handle that alongside everything else I can handle. Hence I just happened to have a conversation with a friend. And my friend, who was not in the situation, who hadn't changed the way that she was thinking, who wasn't emotionally where I was emotionally, had the perspective to go, hold on a second. And I did listen to her. Yeah.
Mm. And what has helped you most to get out of this? Like, if there was any advice that you could give to someone who is experiencing burnout at the moment, what are the most helpful things that they can do to get out of this situation?
Fundamentally, if it's possible, take a pause, take a breather for, even if it's like half a day, for whatever you can afford. And you can afford, because you have to afford some time away because you need to sleep. You have to afford some time away because you do need to eat and all of that sort of thing. You do need to take care of yourself. Even if it's spending some time just reflecting while you're brushing your teeth or something really, basic like that. Listen to what all of you is telling you. Listen to what your body's telling you. Listen to what your physical situation is telling you. Listen to what your emotions are telling you, depending on how you understand yourself, which may be anything from physical, emotional to rational. Listen to what it's saying. Those things that you're aware of, like I was aware of, and this not sleeping thing, I was aware of a twitch, and I thought nothing of it. Begin to think something of it. Ask yourself the question, why is that happening? And what could it be telling me? And I think there's something around just taking an action to move forward, to do something maybe a little bit differently, to see whether or not that changes the circumstances. That will help. And that if you can isolate what might be the drivers of this burnout situation, then, my mom always said to me, if you know the problem, you're already halfway to solving it. So yeah, if you can find what some of these problems are, then you're already on the way to finding out how to change them.
Yeah. And going back to your path, and when you experienced burnout, reconnected with your values and decided that you wanted to do executive coaching full time, can you tell me, how did you experience this transition? Was it a no-brainer and a simple decision for you? Or did you feel doubts when leaving such a traditional, prestigious, well-recognized career track?
It was a no-brainer that I wanted to do it. I needed to think of the practicalities. I needed to think of, things like finances. And I needed to think about, I needed to stop and think about, okay, if I'm going to let go of this consulting career, then what does that mean? I didn't want to make a knee-jerk reaction. So I did actually end up working somewhere else for a bit. I did continue my consulting career for a little bit. I suppose it was almost as a tester, although I wouldn't have been able to say that to them. I didn't even know it really at the time that it was almost a tester.
So you gave it another chance?
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe in second chances. I also wanted to make sure the decision I'm making is right, because this is a major decision to start your own thing. Well, essentially, even though I had been coaching part-time, it's completely different coaching part-time to this being your bread and butter. So I wanted to make sure I was doing consulting a justice, because I knew that the burnout situation happened in a place, and other places might, they are different. So I did that. But what was emerging was very much, I suppose it was a pull towards doing this work, the work that I'm doing at the moment. And I just had to listen to that pull. And being in consulting, it helped me figure out the financial stuff. So, because I knew what I was needing to plan for. And I got to a point where I felt I'm going to do this for a defined amount of time. I'm going to figure out what I would like to have achieved by that amount of time. So I sort of knew what my measurable objectives were, as it were. So I'd be able to track my progress. And I also thought about, well, what might be a backup plan if it doesn't work. So I had all of this, I'm a strategist. I had all this strategy in my head. And that helped to make the move a move with a level of risk that I could handle. Because another thing about me is I am so not risk happy. I don't really take risks apart from starting my own business. That's like the biggest risk that I've ever taken. And I love it.
So would it be fair to say that your biggest consideration was financial one? In a sense that, okay, you're building out a new thing, it's a risk because, well, you're giving up a stable income and you build out your own practice. Would it be fair to say that that was the biggest concern and not like any other concern, perception of others, like, oh my God, I'm leaving a path behind that, I have some opportunity cost, I guess. And if yes, how did you make yourself comfortable about the financial side of things?
It's fair to say the financial side of things was a big consideration. It wasn't the only one, it wasn't the only big one. I did think about, what does it mean if I'm changing my identity, in a sense, from being an employee to being somebody who's going alone. And I had a brief think about, well, how am I going to feel about that? I thought about what would other people think. I did think about certain people, what would their perception be? And I also thought, well, they can have their perceptions. Do I care that much about it? Probably not. So that was less of a big thing. And how I made it okay was I figured out what I needed financially for my limited amount of time to set this up. What would I need financially? How can I make that happen? So I set up a plan for myself, a strategy for that too. And I thought about, how does my life need to change so that it could reflect this new way of being, this new way of living. And what does that look like too? So I suppose in a way I needed to design my next chapter, which is why I didn't do it immediately, because I knew that there's going to be a level of planning it out so that I can look at all the risks, find a way of mitigate. It's such a consulting thing to do. Find all the risks, see if I can mitigate them. But it made sense. It makes a lot of sense to do that. I also had to think about, who am I serving? How much experimentation am I going to allow myself to move into this type of work? So I have an idea, but then I allow the right thing to emerge, rather than holding on to the idea too much. I guess maybe this is what my burnout experience taught me, rather than holding on to specific outcomes, being that perfectionist. I'm going to allow things to unfurl the way that naturally they should or they would do, with a bit of influence and shaping from my part.
And how would you compare before and after? So your life back in consulting and your life right now, what would you say are the most stark differences? What is more exciting, but also what is more challenging on this new path that you're pursuing?
Working for yourself, you learn a lot about yourself. I know that I'm a person who just loves to go down the intellectual rabbit hole and follow my nose down this curious nose down the rabbit hole and just learn a lot about stuff. But I always have to remind myself, well, great learning, but learning isn't work. It's not selling. It's not delivering. So there's always got to be a balance. I have an eye on balance as much as I can. What I found is this work that I do feels so aligned with me. And I don't want that to sound woo-woo in any way, but I feel different. I feel Well, another word we always use, we use a lot, is authentic. And I don't know how to describe a feeling of authenticity, but I guess I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing something that fully reflects me, and it means that I know me so much better than I did when I was an employee, not because of employment, but because I can pay much more attention to who I am and what's important to me and what I want. So from that point of view, I feel very fulfilled. I lean into autonomy a lot. I have as much autonomy as I like, which is great, but also it means I am ultimately accountable only to myself. So that is also new in a way. I am my own boss, and I am my own junior consultant as well. So it's a major and wonderful learning curve.
And towards the end of our conversation, I really want to make sure that we go back to the point that you've mentioned around the importance of psychological safety within organizations. Because obviously all of us know that it has a huge impact on how we feel day to day and how fulfilled we are with our careers. So here I would love to ask you, as an executive coach who works with leaders and organizations on the topics of organizational culture, can you describe how can someone, if they're looking for their next career step, next employer, how can they assess from outside how good is this culture in this new place that they're considering?
They're great questions. I would say that to answer about fulfillment, first of all, one needs to define what fulfillment means for oneself, because that's going to be a very, very individual question. So what does fulfillment mean? And therefore, what is one looking for in an environment that they're about to walk into? Because when we work, we don't work alone. We work in systems. We work inside groups where there are other people, and the people who come together to work together in a group, they form a culture that's very unique, very particular to that group. So paying attention to what's going on inside that group, inside that system is really important. I did mention psychological safety earlier, and if we go into the way that psychological safety is defined by the person who wrote about it first, Amy Edmondson, it's very much around feeling like one is able to speak up without any fear of retaliation or fear of recrimination. Getting to that endpoint, there needs to be quite a lot that happens before that. Something, for example, like trust is very important. It's not the only thing. It's not fully adequate to produce that kind of culture. It's one of the things that is needed. So I would encourage people to ask themselves, how does the ambiance feel within their organization? Do they feel as if they would be able to speak up about something, which could be anything from successes to challenging somebody else's ideas, to disagreeing with somebody about a way forward or something, a process or ideas, including disagreeing with their leader about things, or at least being able to have a conversation that brings in a diversity of opinion. Is it possible to do all of that without feeling that there's going to be some backlash coming back to you? And is it possible for these conversations, which might be a bit difficult to have, is it possible to have them but not feel as if they're going to destroy the relationships and the culture that the team or the organization has? So look into psychological safety for sure. And then if a person is thinking about going into a new organization, then how can they begin to pick up some of these things? For me, psychological safety is super important concept and helps one see a lot of the tangible stuff. Is there other retrospectives? If there other is there feedback? Other ways of people getting together and having these kinds of conversations where they can speak up without recrimination. But I would also tune into some of the unconscious stuff as well, the group dynamics, as much as one can observe and glean some of that. So, for example, if you're in the interview process and you're maybe very near to getting the offer, or you've got the offer and you're trying to figure out, is this place the place for me? And you have an opportunity to join the team you're about to enter into, have the opportunity to join them for a social occasion, or you can have chats with them and you'll be able to see them as a group, not just individually, then try and be a fly on the wall as much as you can and observe what's going on in that group. How do people interact with each other? Do there seem to be those conversations where there's a bit of diversity of opinion, maybe a bit of banter, or are people really deferring to each other on their best behavior kind of thing, or are they deferring to the leader? How does it feel? What are those dynamics like? How do you feel as well inside the social situation when you're observing this group and kind of being part of it? It's when you walk into a room, for example, and two people have had an argument, you can still feel the tension. You can still pick up that something went on. See whether or not you can pick up also those feelings inside a new group, because chances are if you join them within time, those are the feelings you're going to have too. So you want to make sure whether or not this is an organization where you feel like you can do your best work. You feel like it's a place that you're comfortable in. And so as much as you may be wanting to give the right impression as well, make sure that you're able to observe and absorb also what the impression is you're getting from the team. As much as you can pick up as well on power dynamics and the flow of power, on whether there seems to be a very distinct hierarchy or if it's truly feels like it's flat, because a lot of places would like say that they have a flat structural system. It's a lot to try and pick up in, one social engagement, also when you're trying to give a good impression yourself. But as much as you're able to tune into how you're feeling and what you're observing and what that might mean, how you make sense of it, then that gives you some unconscious clues, as well as some of the conscious clues too.
And final question, if you have a client who is a high achiever in a high pressure industry, tech, consulting, law, finance, who feel unfulfilled, what one piece of advice would you give to them?
The very first question I would ask them if they came to me for coaching is, how are you feeling? And what are you making of those feelings? What is that feeling telling you? Because in my mind, in my world, feelings are data. Feelings, emotions, they tell us stuff that hasn't maybe made it quite to the forefront of our mind and we haven't quite turned it into words. So what are you feeling and what is that feeling telling you? I've talked a bit about self-reflection as well. And so being able to just reflect on, taking time to reflect on what's going on inside. And then once you're beginning to get some clues from that, take an action. Take one, even if it's one small turtle step, a little action towards insight, going into a certain direction. That might be speaking to somebody, that might be writing down what you think, that might be talking out loud and creating a voice note about what you think. It might be thinking how to solve a particular problem. Just do something, because that puts you into a particular direction, which you can course correct. Doesn't have to be the perfect action, but it gets you over the inertia, and it also helps you stay within control, stay within your agency, so that you are feeling that you're in control still and that you're not a passive, silent recipient of the stuff that's happening to you. So take one small step in a useful direction is what I'd say.
Thank you so much, Daphne, for such an insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it. And good luck on your journey ahead.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it too.